A phantom stalks the halls of PseudoPod towers. A phantom made of terror, disconcertingness, and really scary things. That phantom is PseudoPod. That phantom is here. Now.
PseudoPod, episode 939 for September 20th, 2024. Cheating Death by Henry Hertz. Narrated by Tanya Milosevic. Hosted by Kat Day, with audio by Chelsea Davis. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing okay. I'm Kat, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week, and I'm excited to tell you that for this week we have Cheating Death by Henry Hertz. This material originally appeared in the Hitherto Secret Experiments of Marie Curie, edited by Brian Thomas Schmidt and Henry L. Hertz, published by Blackstone Publishing, copyright 2023. Henry Hertz's stories have appeared in Daily Science Fiction, Weird Tales, Metastellar, Highlights for Children, Ladybug Magazine, and anthologies from Albert Whitman & Co., Blackstone Publishing, Brigid's Gate Press, Air and Nothingness Press, Bayon Books, Titan Books, and elsewhere. He's edited 6 anthologies and written 12 picture books. Check out his blog, www.henryhertz.com. Tanya Milosevic is originally from Serbia, but has been in the US since the age of 5. She has been voice acting since her senior year of high school and can be heard all over, including Darker Projects, Broken Sea Audio Productions, 90 Nocturne Boulevard, Edict Zero, Pendant, and Dunsteef. She produces her own radio dramas and posts them to her podcast Lightning Bolt Theatre of the Mind. She says, "I'm visually impaired and have ROP and glaucoma, but use Goldwave and SoundForge to record and post-produce my audio." One quick note from me before we get started. This story mentions a gymnasium for the sons of Russian soldiers. Now, for many of us, the word gymnasium probably conjures up images of climbing ropes and big blue padded mats, but in this context, it refers to a secondary school, or, for my American friends, a high school. And now, we have a story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
Cheating Death by Henry Hertz. Narrated by Tanya Milosevic. I didn't join in as my surviving family members conversed over dinner. Usually, the aroma of hearty pork and cabbage bigos stirred my appetite, but today it reminded me of the past. Knotting my stomach, I winced, the clinking of utensils on plates like needles jabbing my brain. Father gently pulled me aside. "What is wrong, my little Maria?" But he knew. My sigh almost became a sob. It's been years, but I still miss them in the worst way, Tato. Me too, Maria. Since the passing of my Roman Catholic mother, my father, a brilliant math and physics teacher, no longer suppressed his religious skepticism. By the age of 15, I too had lost faith in a deity who'd allowed disease to rip apart a loving family. Science became my religion. Defeating disease, my holy grail. I vowed I'd wield science to cheat death itself, for I still believed in it. Father wrapped a strong, comforting arm around my shoulders and led me into the study. Boxes of laboratory equipment cluttered the room. "What's all this, Tato?" He scowled. My Russian supervisor barged into my lab at school and ordered me to shut it down. Sadly, we have no space to set up a lab here. My heart leaped. "Even so, will you teach me how to use the equipment?" It was a rhetorical question, for Father loved nothing more than encouraging his children to learn. He smiled. "Yes, of course, Maria. Now help me carry these boxes to the shed out back." I did not receive a typical education, but again, I was not a typical girl. Gradually, under Father's guidance, I gained familiarity with the equipment, supplementing my foundation of theoretical science. I filled a notebook with calculations and equations in my ungodly crusade to fight disease and repel death. But I had no way to conduct experiments. Yet. My public girls' high school, Warsaw's Gymnasium No. 3, filled the second floor of a converted convent, adjacent to the Visitationist church. The church's rococo facade of stacked pillars faced a broad avenue, Krakowski Przedmieście, down the center of which ran a horse-drawn trolley. Before I was born, the genius composer Frédéric Chopin used to play the church organ during services for school children. But tuberculosis took him too. Damn that disease. Damn all disease. After classes, I strolled home through the lush Saxon gardens. Majestic chestnut trees formed an opera house from which birds serenaded. I stopped to scatter breadcrumbs. Sparrows flocked to the grass around me, one even landing on my outstretched palm to feed. Alexei approached with his brutish comrades, Dmitri and Igor. They attended a nearby gymnasium for sons of Russian soldiers. A blue-eyed fourth boy, unknown to me, accompanied them. Alexei sneered. "Well, if it isn't Messy Maria!" Discordant notes of cruelty rang in Dmitri and Igor's laughter. The new boy frowned at Alexei's unprovoked insult of my unruly blonde hair. As the intruders neared, the birds scattered, except the sparrow in my hand. It trusts me. "Kill it," ordered Alexei. My eyes widened. What? His casual malice rocked me. Why? "Because I said so." He stepped closer. I twitched my hand, and the sparrow took flight. "You're safe now." Alexei's face reddened at my defiance. He shoved me to the ground, towering over me with a scowl. Anger boiled inside me. I clenched my fists. The fourth boy grabbed Alexei's shoulders. "What are you doing?" Alexei shook himself free of the restraining hands. "Well, if you love this Polish bitch so much, Maxim, maybe you should spend time with her instead of us. Igor and Dmitri, let's go." They stormed off. Maxim helped me to my feet. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I'll be fine. Thank you." He shook his head. "I need to pick better friends. Can I start with you?" I brushed my hair, now more disheveled than usual, out of my face and smiled. "I'd like that." Maxim's grin eased into a frown as he turned his head. Something's wrong with them. I picked up my book bag. Beyond being rude and bullying? Yes. Sometimes after school, they mutilated dead animals from the biology lab. They also chased stray cats and dogs. If they managed to catch one in a sack, they'd beat it against the wall. The poor things just left in an alley, dead or alive. Monsters. My face flushed. Wait, this is a chance to obtain subjects for my experiments. Maxim, I love animals. Will you bring them to me? His eyes widened. What? I'll heal and feed the injured ones, and I'll bury the dead. Maxim gazed at me, his head tilted as he considered my unusual request. If I agree, how will you know when and where to find me? We must do this without raising suspicions. Let's meet each day after school, in front of the Treasury Ministry. That's on my way home. If you have no animal that day, we can walk together. You have a strange mind, but a good heart, Maria. I'll help you. He gave a polite nod and turned. See you tomorrow, then. I sighed. I miss Mama. Instead of walking directly home, I visited Powazki Cemetery, 100 acres of tree-shaded tombstones and mausoleums. Distracted by broad white elms, hawthorns, and nearly lifelike statues, I nearly tumbled into a freshly dug hole. Reaching Mama's grave, I bowed my head. How can I pursue my goal of cheating death? I have lab equipment and will soon have test subjects, but I lack a lab to conduct experiments. I'm as trapped as you are here, Mama. A sudden breeze raised goosebumps on my arms. That's it! I had no space or privacy to set up a laboratory at home, but a nighttime cemetery offered me both. Thank you, dear Mama. I strolled down somber aisles of carved gray stone, eventually discovering an imposing Gothic-style mausoleum bordered by 4 short square pillars wrapped in laurel. Perfect. A tarnished brass crypt lock secured the heavy door. I wasn't worried. For a year ago, I'd acquired the skill of questionable morality, but indisputable usefulness. Lock-picking. While my family slept, I snuck to our rickety backyard shed. I hurried to load wood planks, tools, and nails on a toy wagon borrowed from Kazia. I mustn't be caught. Repeatedly glancing over my shoulder, I made my way to the cemetery, as quickly as Yosef eats kielbasa. I hid in alleys twice to avoid being seen by late-night strollers. The night's chill embraced me. Animated by gusts of wind, the jagged moon shadows of Powazki Cemetery's tree branches looked like arms reaching up from graves. I tightened my overcoat collar and worked on the crypt lock with 2 hairpins. Cold numbed my fingers, but eventually the lock yielded. The heavy door squealed in protest as I pried it outward. The doorway gaped like the black maw of a monster. I lit a lantern, illuminating the mausoleum's interior and the next chapter of my quest. Brass plaques named the deceased, 6 on the left wall, 6 on the right. Stale, musty air muffled my steps like a blanket. Disturbing the thick dust carpeting the tile floor, I assembled a crude table and shelving. The hair on my neck rose as I felt a growing ire from the interred. Did the harsh sounds of sawing and hammering in a formerly silent abode offend their deaf ears? Do their unseeing eyes now watch and judge me? My heart pounded in warning. I am an intruder here. Eager to leave, I locked the crypt and rushed home. Creeping into our small bathroom, I quietly scrubbed away the grime and sweat of my labors before collapsing into bed. The next night, I returned to our backyard shed. The boxes and equipment reminded me of presents under a Christmas tree. Some contained beakers, test tubes, and other glassware. Other boxes held biology equipment like a scale, alcohol burner, and even a microscope. One crate contained scalpels, sutures, forceps, syringes, and other medical equipment. But unlike at Christmas, I couldn't unwrap all my presents at once. It took almost a week to shuttle all the equipment to the cemetery, 1 box per night, and the ongoing loss of sleep took its toll. My family said nothing. If they noticed my decline, it was attributed to continued grieving for Mama and Zosia. They didn't know that I burned the candle at both ends in my race to master science and protect them from death. Over the following weeks, Maxim proved true to his word. He brought me blood-stained sacks, rats and rabbits from the laboratory, stray cats and dogs that had fallen victim to Alexei. Those rare days where he carried no grim burden became welcome points of light in my increasingly gloomy and untethered blur of school, homework, and skulking midnight visits to the cemetery. I would keep my promise to bury the animals after learning from them. In my nighttime laboratory, I tenderly apologized. I'd cure you if I could, but my reach isn't that long. Forgive me for desecrating your body. Please teach me how to help the living. Typical girls collected dolls, but I was not a typical girl. In the lantern-lit stench of my growing collection of corpses, my hands became more skilled as animal bodies yielded their secrets. Rising the next morning, my mirror revealed that lack of sleep and appetite had given me a gaunt, haunted expression. I no longer even attempted to control my wild hair. My family expressed concern at my deteriorating appearance. I did what I could to allay their unease, a worry I shared but forced down. Mama and Zosia would want me to continue my efforts to protect the rest of our family from death. One sunny afternoon, Maxim met me after school carrying a brown paper bag. He wore a wide grin. My heart leaped at the tiny squeak. "Is that a rat?" "I finally was able to save one," Maxim said, nodding. "Unfortunately, not before Alexei broke its ankle." "Oh, poor thing. Thank you, Maxim. I'll do what I can for it." In my joy, I gave him a one-armed hug before remembering propriety. Finally, a chance to heal something. "Thank you again, Maxim. I will see you tomorrow." I headed home, peering into the bag. The sturdy brown rat's light-colored belly, slanted snout, and small eyes and ears indicated Ratus norvegicus. I spoke Russian, German, and French, but as this was a Polish rat, it seemed appropriate to converse with him in Polish. "I shall call you Damien, Greek for to tame. I'm so sorry that awful Alexei hurt you. I'll do my best to heal your leg, but I can't very well keep you at home. I'll take you to my laboratory now." Damien, being a very clever rat, squeaked his understanding. I walked to the cemetery, excitement quickening my pace. As I entered the mausoleum, Damien squeaked in alarm. Dulled by fatigue, I'd grown accustomed to the rank odor of dead bodies stacked in a corner. "Sorry about the smell, but you'll be safe here." I gently set Damien in a straw-padded hat box. Pouring water into a small bowl, I gave him a chunk of Tilzeki cheese, left over from my uneaten lunch. After feeding and complimenting Damien, I'd earned enough of his trust that he'd let me pet him. I dared not try and set his ankle without a painkiller, so I taped it as a temporary measure. "What a sensible and handsome fellow you are. I finished my stoichiometry and other calculations. My formula should stimulate bone and muscle growth. If it works, it'll help your leg heal faster. And eventually bring back the dead." Squeak! "No, I can't give it to you yet, because I don't have any components, and I want to test it first on our deceased friends," I said, nodding at the pile of 24 animal corpses. Limbs stiffened into disturbing poses. Squeak! My mouth opened. "Yes, of course. What a clever boy. A Russian boys' gymnasium will have chemistry supplies. I'll be back soon." The fact that I'd conversed with a rat should have warned me I was pushing myself too hard in the pursuit of cheating death. I pulled Kazia's wagon to the rear entrance of the nearest gymnasium. When drunk soldiers staggered by, I lunged behind a low wall. This lock proved resistant to my efforts, so I wrapped my scarf around the brick and broke the door's glass pane. "Hurry! The longer I'm here, the greater chance of being caught." My heart pounded. After a few minutes of frantic searching, I found the shiny, modern chemistry laboratory, the hazardous items locked in a solid oak cabinet. I picked the lock and stared like a hungry child gawking at shelves brimming with chocolate. Can you hear footsteps, Death? I'm coming for you. The glass bottles of liquids and powders tinkled as I rolled my wagon back to the cemetery. In retrospect, my indifference to being surrounded by the dead should have warned me. Damien, look what I foraged! Acetyl chloride, aluminum chloride, ammonium perchlorate, benzene, cadmium powder, chlorocetyl chloride, dioxane, ethyl chloride, formaldehyde, hydrochloric acid, hydrazine, lead arsenic powder, magnesium, mercuric iodide, potassium perchlorate, phenolphthalein, sodium perchlorate, sodium salicylate, strychnine, sulfuric acid, uranium salts, and white phosphorus. Squeak! Well, I probably don't need all of this, but luck favors the prepared. Speaking of preparation, if I encounter Alexei again, I'll need a way to protect myself. I mixed 2 chemical different defenses, slipping a stoppered test tube in my pocket and placing a stoppered Erlenmeyer flask on the corner of the table next to the lantern. Squeak! Yes, I'll make you something for the pain. I treated sodium salicylate with acetyl chloride to produce acetyl salicylic acid, dissolving 5 milligrams of the powder in 10 milligrams of water. I fed it to Damien in an eyedropper. Between the painkiller and the trust that had developed between us, he let me set and splint his ankle with admirable fortitude. What a brave boy you are. Nearly collapsing with fatigue, I bid Damien good night and headed home. After my family fell asleep the next night, I rushed to the cemetery, carrying a notepad filled with calculations, scribbled so messily that only I could interpret them. My hands shook with excitement. Having traversed the cemetery many times, I now greeted some of its inhabitants by name. Good evening, Mr. Zielinski. I trust all is well, Mrs. Pollock. They never replied. Not yet. Good evening, Damien. Squeak. I painstakingly measured and combined the components in a complex series of boiling, deposition, sublimation, and condensation. Are you ready? Squeak. Damien's enthusiasm was contagious. I browsed through the pile of corpses, choosing a black and white Norwegian forest cat, its head and tail bent at odd angles courtesy of Alexei. Filling a syringe with my chemical solution, I injected 20 milliliters into its neck, and another 20 at the base of its tail. Selecting a rat, rabbit, and dog exhibiting similar abuse, I injected their injury sites, adjusting the dosage and proportion to body weight. Squeak! Nothing yet, Damien. Patience. That was easier said than done. For a tortured hour, I paced the cold, cramped space of the mausoleum, mumbling equations to myself and running my hand through my unbound hair. Periodically, I'd return the blood-stained, mutilated test subject's open-eyed gaze. I couldn't help myself, fretting over my 4 little patients, like a baker checking on her first loaves. Nothing. Squeak. Sigh. Yes, maybe the regeneration of tissue will recur overnight. All we can do now is wait. I laid him in his bed. Good night, Damien. I shall be back tomorrow. The following evening, I set Damien on the lab table, where he paid close attention as if my colleague. The 4 treated corpses showed no signs of healing. Damn! Squeak! I was quite careful, Damien, I said, grinning at his earnest attempt to help. But I suppose it couldn't hurt to triple-check my equations. Staring at my calculations until my eyes blurred, I found no mistakes. This should work, I said, lifting my notebook. My math's correct, and the bottles were clearly marked. Perhaps they weren't labeled accurately. It took an hour or so to titrate the chemicals. Aha! The sulfuric acid's diluted! I adjusted my calculations to account for the weaker acid, prepared the second batch, and repeated the prior night's injections. Waiting again proved the hardest part. Damien, would you like to try the medicine too? Squeak! I injected him in the thigh above his broken leg. After an hour of anxious hair-tugging and running my fingernails along the stone mausoleum walls, I checked the corpses. Nothing. Damien, though no worse, was no better either. Damn! In my frustration, I accidentally yanked out strands from my scalp, the blonde hair bright against the red of my bleeding fingernails, which I'd worn down to the quick. I must find a way to cheat death. Doubling the dosage, I administered it to all the corpses. Raising my arms to stretch my tight back and shoulders, I glanced at the brass plaque-adorned wall. 12 people are interred here. Would my solution work on them? I shook my head. That's a queer thought. Go home to bed, Maria. Inadequate eating and sleeping turned my days blurry and dreamlike. Only at night, when I hunted death, did my mind seem to sharpen, and my hands regain their nimbleness. Maria, Kasia tapped my shoulder as we walked home from school. Did you hear what I said? I shook my head to clear it. Sorry, I was distracted. You've been distracted for weeks now. You're not paying attention in class. Sorry to say it, but your eyes are wilder than your hair. I'm worried about you. Thanks, Kasia. You're a dear. I'll be fine. We reached her home at Palak-Niebieski, where her father served as librarian to Count Zmoyski. Please get some sleep, she replied, concern written on her face. See you tomorrow. I nodded. I'll sleep after I drive death into a corner. A block later, Alexei, Igor, and Dmitri ambushed me. Ugh, don't whores usually pay closer attention to their appearance? Alexei taunted. Scowling, I muttered, Cretin. Forgetting in my mental fog that cretins don't like to be reminded of their condition. Alexei took a step toward me. Bitch, your mother's a whore, too. The slur against my revered mama took me by surprise. I bunched my fists, losing all self-control. She was a saint, you pig! Do you even know who fathered you? Cretins also don't appreciate having their lineage questioned. The 3 boys advanced with fury in their eyes. Having anticipated yet another assault, I'd gotten in the habit of carrying a chemical defense. Yanking the stoppered test tube from my coat pocket, I hurled it to the ground in front of them. It shattered, white fumes wreathing the thugs. The test tube held an acylation of benzene with chloroacetyl chloride and an aluminum chloride catalyst. Its vapor causes skin irritation, tearing, and respiratory pain. I fled home, their coughing and curses ringing in my ears. I'm safe for now, but they'll come for me again, angrier than before. That night, the treated animals lay where I'd left them, limbs splayed as if in a macabre dance, eyes still dull. They showed no signs of healing. I don't know how long I cried. Damien hobbled around, trying to cheer me up. All that work for nothing. I stomped out of the mausoleum and wandered the cemetery, hoping for an encouraging word from one of its residents. All I heard was leaves rustling, though there was no breeze. I found a shovel leaning against the tool shed and dug a shallow grave, the blade strikes seeming to echo longer than they should. Gathering the rat corpses in my arms, even their fur stiff from dried blood, I carried them to the hole, apologizing along the way. My tears dripped onto their rigid bodies before I covered them with dirt. Another hole accepted all the rabbits. The cats and dogs stared back at me with unseeing eyes as I put them into their graves. Except that first feline. I saved the cat for further experimentation. My steps dragged as I returned home. I felt feverish, but did not let that stop me from returning to my lab that moonless night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I navigated the dark cemetery. My darting backward glances never noticed anything but silent tombstones. "Good evening, Damien. I'm going to take some muscle and bone tissue from this cat to figure out why my solution isn't working. Would you like to watch?" Squeak! I expected no less from the inquisitive rodent, and set him atop my table, next to a cookie. It may have simply been wishful thinking on my part, but he seemed more agile than yesterday. Shaving thin slices of muscle and bone from the cat with a scalpel, I mounted them on glass microscope slides. I nearly jumped out of my skin when the mausoleum door grated on its rusty hinges. The 3 Russian bullies gaped wide-eyed at me from the narrow doorway, Alexei grasping a shovel. "Ugh, you smell as bad as you look." How did they find my laboratory? They must have followed me here. I'm cornered at night in a mausoleum. My hands trembled before anger flared in my chest at the prospect of losing my irreplaceable equipment and notes. I stood, fists balled, legs set wide, and shouted, "Get out! Do not come between me and death!" "Mother of God!" cried Alexei, staring at the dead cat. "What sacrilegious devilry is this? She's a witch!" He stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "And we know what to do with a Polish witch!" Igor and Dmitri flanked him. The laboratory table stood between me and the Russians, but they stood between me and the doorway. Damien hissed. "Look, the witch has a rat familiar." Alexei raised the shovel. "Not my sweet, clever Damien." "Don't!" I warned. Alexei smashed Damien with the flat of the shovel, crushing his head and spine. "No!" Alexei leered. "Now it's your turn. Do you want to say a final prayer?" "Prayer?" A laugh escaped my lips, sounding maniacal even to my ears. "I worship only science. I won't worship a god that rips mothers from their children and allows Russian invaders to murder Poles." The dead cat on my table moaned and struggled to its feet, rotting flaps of skin hanging loosely from the dissection cuts. With its head locked in an unnatural angle, the cat's tail jerked spasmodically. Pus oozed from eyes glowing yellow. Could it be? Disturbingly incongruous in a corpse-filled mausoleum, a grim smile cracked my face. I cheated death. When the cat hissed like a poisonous serpent, the boys jumped back, disbelief and terror on their faces. "Christ, what have you done?" Seizing a bottle of sulfuric acid, I threw it to the stone floor at their feet. It splashed on Alexei and Igor's shoes and shins. The two howled, struggling to tear off the bottom of their pant legs without touching acid. The cat howled in mocking chorus. "I'll finish the witch," growled Dmitri. As he knelt to grab the shovel, I hurled my lantern and the previously prepared Erlenmeyer flask at his feet, closing my eyes and covering my ears. The mixture of magnesium and potassium perchlorate ignited with a brilliant flash and thunderous boom, echoing within the stone walls. Disoriented from the noise, but with my eyesight intact, I dashed past the prone, writhing boys, out of the mausoleum. I tripped on the raised threshold in my panicked haste. My right knee struck a flagstone. I gasped as pain radiated up my leg. Run! I struggled to my feet, but could only hobble away. My knee swelled with each agonizing step. I spared a glance over my shoulder. The boys staggered out of the mausoleum, their eyes still recovering from the flash. They stumbled toward me, too slowed by acid burns. I limped between trees in the darkness. Hurry, they're gaining! My foot snagged on a low stone plaque. Twisting in midair to protect my knee, I thudded to the ground on my left side. The boys surrounded me, all of us gasping for breath. Dimitri jerked his thumb back toward my lab. Should I go get the shovel? Alexei grinned like a wolf. I have a better idea. If she's so fond of that mausoleum, let's seal her inside, forever. Dimitri, grab her right arm. Igor, her left. I'll get her legs. His eyes narrowed. Help! I twisted and punched from the ground, but Dimitri and Igor managed to seize my wrists. My frantic kicking kept Alexei at bay until all hell broke loose. Blood-freezing screeches echoed through the graveyard. Patches of earth seemed to boil. Alexei's mouth fell open in horror. Igor shrieked, barely maintaining his grip on my wrists. I craned my neck for a view. A dozen animated animal corpses with glowing yellow eyes clawed their way out of the spots where I'd buried them. Stench assaulted my nostrils as they surged around us. The putrid wave swamped Dimitri. No! He screamed. The corpses savaged his face and neck, blood spattered. Igor recoiled, his face ashen with terror. God damn! Indeed, he has, I thought. More hissing and howling animal corpses clawed up from their graves. Before Igor could move, creatures swarmed around him, clawing his acid-wounded shins. That dropped him to the ground, where they scurried onto his head. His corpse-muffled cries to a merciless god brought him no salvation, drawing instead only a savage smile from me. Igor tore a frenzied rabbit from his neck, crushed it in his bare hand, and dropped it. Within a few seconds, the rabbit rose and resumed its attack. My heart leaped with joy when a rat scurried over, his eyes glowing yellow. Damien! I scooped him up tenderly, my pain forgotten. Alexei stood paralyzed by the carnage of reanimated animals chewing off his friends' faces. He'd wet himself in terror. A thrill of triumph surged through me. I did it! I cheated death! My newfound power comforted me like a warm cloak. The resurrected dogs snarled at Alexei, who turned and fled. He only got 10 yards before they hamstringed him and tore out his throat. I stood, wobbly. My mind swirled with questions. What shall I do with my new friends? Will I be able to teach them restraint? Can I adjust my chemical formula to work faster? Wait. First things first. What should be done with the bodies? I brushed myself off, and after some searching found an open gravesite. Addressing the 2 largest dogs, I pointed. Please help me drag the boys' bodies into this hole. Each grabbed one of Alexei's legs in its jaws. The rest of you, please lick up the spilled blood. 3 warm bodies tumbled into the grave. Help me cover them, I requested. The dogs turned their backs to the hole and scraped in loose dirt with their paws. Squeak! Yes, you're right, Damien. I addressed the corpse animals. Thank you, my pretties. You saved my life, just as I restored yours. Euphoria dulling the pain of my injured knee, I lavished smiles and caresses before directing the creatures to return to the earthen beds from which they'd erupted. Time to rest until I need you again. Can I modify my formula to work on humans? I eyed the mausoleum. I do have 12 test subjects available, after all. But what price will fate extract from my experiments? I shrugged off the unanswerable question for now and headed home, Damien riding on my shoulder. He was not a typical pet, but then again, I was not a typical teen.
Well done. You've survived another story. What did you think of Cheating Death by Henry Hertz? If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to pop over to our Discord channel and tell us. Our author sent us these notes. In real life, Maya never raised the dead, much less stole chemicals. I selected dangerous chemicals from a 2015 Washington State Department of Health list of substances proposed to be banned from schools due to the serious health hazards they posed. Maria never mixed the chemicals mentioned in the story. However, those mentioned are scientifically accurate. Treating sodium salicylate with acetyl chloride produces acetyl salicylic acid, or aspirin. Tear gas is an acylation of benzene with chloroacetyl chloride and an aluminium chloride catalyst. Flashbang grenades use a pyrotechnic metal oxidant mix of magnesium or aluminium and an oxidizer such as potassium perchlorate or potassium nitrate. And that brings me neatly to my notes. There are lots of lovely little details in this story. As a chemist, I do love the chemistry and the list of chemicals. Having heard the author's note, we now know why they're in alphabetical order. I did wonder, but I'd assumed Maya had taken them from alphabetically labelled shelves. Yeah. Benzene, cadmium powder, hydrazine, lead arsenate powder, strychnine, uranium salts, white phosphorus. It's quite the list. The sort of list that makes a chemist wince. And that explains why they've all been banned in schools. I can't help noticing proposed to be banned in schools in 2015. Okay. Yeah. But mind you, America in particular doesn't seem to be that fussed about making schools safe. But anyway, back to the chemicals. Lead arsenate contains both lead ions and arsenic. Woohoo! Double whammy. It used to be used as an insecticide because humans. Apples from orchards treated with it are likely still unfit for human consumption many, many years later. Hydrazine, toxic at the parts per million level and explosive. Strychnine can cause respiratory failure and brain death in 15 to 30 minutes. Never mind the violent muscle cramps. White phosphorus is acutely toxic and ignites spontaneously in air with a flame that's extremely hard to put out and, yes, produces yet more toxic fumes. And uranium salts, enough said. I don't quite know what was in Maya's formula, but I wouldn't want to drink it or indeed be in the same room as it. And speaking of Maya, how can you not love a young girl who thinks, no space or privacy to set up a laboratory at home, but a nighttime cemetery? Perfect. Honestly, this is my kind of protagonist. And that's before we even get to Damien, the rat that talks in squeaks. Is that a Discworldian Death of Rats reference? Be nice if it was. Let's say it is. And then there's Maxim. He's with the violent boys at the start, but when he sees them behaving appallingly, he speaks up and does the right thing, even though it might negatively impact him. Well, it is a fantasy story. I say that with a certain amount of cynicism, because over just the last few weeks, the list of men who have been reported as behaving abusively towards women is long and deeply, extraordinarily depressing. I shan't name them all because we'd be here for too long, and I am tired. But I will just say this. How many men witnessed those behaviours or knew about them, and instead of, like Maxim, deciding they needed better friends and co-workers, and instead of that, they laughed them off? Or worse still, participated themselves? I fear I know the answer, and it's too many, far too many. And right now, many of those men are silent. And they're silent because they know damn well that the harm done to those women is partly on their hands, because they stood by and did nothing and let whichever one of them you think I'm talking about right now believe he was untouchable. A god who could do nothing to anyone and who would never, ever be called out on any of it. They certainly weren't going to call him out on it because they were making lots and lots of money. And what else matters? I hope they're all very, very proud of themselves. Toxic masculinity can be just as harmful as strychnine and white phosphorus fumes, and unfortunately we haven't quite managed to ban that particular poison just yet. Be more Maxim, speak out, find better friends, and make better choices. Anyway, one more nice little reference in this story. Maya says to her corpse animals, "Thank you, my pretties. You saved my life." Now, this is surely a Wizard of Oz reference, you say. But here's a fun fact. Ask most people what the Wizard of Oz line is, and they'll tell you it's "Fly, my pretties." But this is an example of the Mandela effect, which is where a large mass of people believe that an event occurred when it didn't. Because that line isn't in the movie. Really isn't. Watch it. Prove it to yourself. The witch only ever says, "Fly, fly." She does call Dorothy my pretty elsewhere in the film, and so the best theory is that the two lines somehow got merged in people's minds, but nobody really knows what happened here. Perhaps the timelines really did get crossed somewhere along the line. But in this story, Maya can of course say whatever she likes to her pet animated corpses, and good luck to her, I say. She's not a typical teen, and whomst of us were. I love it when authors slide these little things into their stories. Wonderful work from Henry Hertz. On to the subject of subscribing and support. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we're formally a non-profit. One-time donations are gratefully received and much appreciated, but what really makes a difference is subscribing. A $5 monthly Patreon donation gives us more than just money. It gives us stability, reliability, dependability, and a well-maintained tower from which to operate. And trust us, you want that as much as we do. If you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out to us at donations@escapeartists.net. And if you can't afford to support us financially, then please consider leaving reviews or episodes, or just generally talking about them on whichever form of social media you can't stay away from this week. We now have a Blue Sky account and we'd love to see you there. Find us at pseudopod.org. If you like merch, you can also support us by buying hoodies, t-shirts and other bits and pieces from the Escape Artist Void merch store. The link is in various places, including our latest social media posts. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International Licence. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. Next week we have In Haskins by Carson Winter, narrated by Jess Lewis and hosted by Scott Campbell. And finally, PseudoPod and Hitch advise us. Never lie, steal or cheat. But if you must lie, lie in the arms of the one you love. If you must steal, steal away from bad company. And if you must cheat, cheat death. See you soon, folks. Take care. Stay safe.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.